That was the idea?
Yeah. What'd you think?
Not bad.
Not bad? You think so?
Yeah, not bad.
I don't know. I think it could have been better. I think that my ideas have really just been falling off a cliff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to lord it over you, but I think I did a little bit of a better intro last week.
Was that last week? Or I thought that was... Oh, that was last week. No. Last week was the Mike story. You opened it up right with that. And I was like, is it going to be a pun again?
Just doing it for the pun.
Welcome. Come one, come all.
Yeah.
To the Lords of the Fallen stream.
That game is rough.
All right, let's back up. First of all, I believe we're talking about Lords of the Fallen from 2014.
The new one called Lords of the Fallen 2?
No, it's literally just called Lords of the Fallen. Same name. When I stream Lords of the Fallen 1, Twitch has a bug because it has the same name, and it will like show me under both. It's fucked up. Even though I specifically select, like, no, I'm streaming the old one. I had somebody come into chat and was like, hey, you're streaming under the wrong category. This is, and I'm like, no, you shut your fucking mouth. Yeah, dude. Yeah, that game is rough for sure. I think I'm right near the end. I could be wrong.
That wouldn't surprise me. It seems short. Like playing it, it's like there's not like I'm looking at like the magic stuff, and it's like, I mean, dude, you can max out one of your 4 spells in like the first level.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I have all my shit maxed out, and I'm like, I literally can't do more spell stuff.
Right.
And so I'm like, if that's any sense of progression, like I'm done. My strat isn't changing. I've been using the same weapon for like 3 hours of game now. It has to be longer than that. It must be longer than that. Let's back up though. Let's back up.
Okay.
So you and I both started. Okay, let's back up even more. I started playing the original Lords of the Fallen from 2014. I had never played it. I just heard it was dog shit. And so the new one came out, and I was like, oh yeah, let me give that a try. Because, you know, I'm a freak, and I wanted to play the old one.
Well, and you know, that's like as far as Souls-likes go, Lords of the Fallen's like the first one.
It was the first one, yeah, for sure. So, you know, hey, shout out Deck 13.
That's the name of the studio?
Yeah, Deck 13 is the studio. They also are the studio that made The Surge and The Surge 2. And I want to say something else recently, maybe not. But so they've kind of redeemed themselves since, and but the game wasn't super well reviewed. It's not horrible. You know, it's like 70 or 60 or something like that.
I was kind of surprised by the reviews because they seem right.
Yeah.
Where like, you know, you bounced off the game immediately and were like, this fucking blows because you didn't know what you were doing.
Right.
But after you get into the game, you're like, okay, like it's definitely like, if it was not a Souls-like, it's like a 5 out of 10.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's those Souls-like elements that help elevate it to be like, okay, there's still some fun there. Like I genuinely enjoy. So you beat like the tutorial level, you fight the first boss, the first warden or whatever.
Yeah, the first warden.
Genuinely enjoy that second level as far as like, hey, like where do I go? What can I do? Like
the game's like exploration is surprisingly, it's not like super interesting, but
and there's not like a lot to find, but
right.
It is very much like, dude, like there's a lot of ways you can go.
There's a lot of ways you can go, especially, dude, that whole, you know, catacombs area, right? That like
leads to a bunch of different places.
And there's a bunch of different ways that you can enter that area. You can get the key, you can go beat the other boss and come in the back door. There's even the other door you have to open from inside, but it becomes a way you can go back in there. And it's, yeah, there's, it's surprisingly decent.
I was genuinely surprised by that, where I'm like, okay, the the levels themselves aren't that interesting. The combat's not that interesting. Exploring around, you do get some decent like gear. Like there's
some decent
rewards.
Gear.
One of the things I really don't like about the exploration is, and this is really extreme in the catacombs, but it's the same everywhere, where it's like stuff is always like just around a corner, or it's like everywhere you go, you need to really like turn your camera around a lot to like in the catacombs, there's all sorts of doors that are just like in really short hallways, and it's like, there was a door like on the side of that hallway.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, I missed that, and like there's a ton of stuff. There's so much stuff in the game like that, and that's not super fun exploration to me. Like having to really like comb through everything.
I don't mind it, but it's it's not interesting exploration.
It's not great. It's really interesting though, because
it is really interesting.
The way that the game handles respawning enemies, where it's like you can go to a bonfire and restock your heals without respawning enemies.
Yes.
Makes it so it's like, well, I've got to really comb through this area, but also I could go and kill one guy, use all my potions, go run back, get all my potions back, and then just, be very methodical about it.
Yes.
And be able to explore with no risk to self.
Yes.
That is a really strange element that none of the Souls games do that.
Not
There's
even close.
still no Souls-likes that have done something like that.
The closest is like Dark Souls 2, that like, hey, if you kill the enemies 10 times, they go away.
Yeah, they stop spawning.
But that's more permanent. What you're talking about is really interesting. And I don't know if you noticed. It is interesting. It is. It's really interesting. I don't know if you noticed, but the bonfire things, like the crystal shards, they have shards representing how many heals you're going to get back when you use it. And every time you use it, one drops off. So if you use it again, you get one less heal. And if you use it again, you get another. To a minimum
of 3?
Nope, to a minimum of you can't use it anymore to
really?
get your heals back. Yeah. Yeah, so you can just keep, doing that. But when you die, what happens is you get your default however many.
Does it reset the shards?
Yes, when you die, it resets the shards. Yeah.
There are elements of the way that game is designed that I think are really smart.
Yeah.
That mechanic
is like,
in tandem with the more like
lengthy exploration and
very thorough exploration, where it's not like, it reminds me a lot of Dark Souls 2 in the way that it's like in Dark Souls 2, the hidden doors that are just fucking everywhere, and it's like, you just have to run into walls and mash X or A and hope that you like, was there a hidden door that like you'll do that if you're looking for there's no other way to find hidden doors in Dark Souls 2. It's a nightmare. Yeah. I mean, the online comes into play.
The online changes things, sure.
But
it's like, look it up.
The way that Lords of the Fallen handles the exploration, coupled with the way they handle restocking the heals and the respawn system, it's like those work together. Yeah. And they make the mechanics
as
make
well
sense.
As the XP modifier, where it's like you add that on top of it too, so now you're not incentivized to
like, you don't want to stock your heals all the time.
Right.
But
I don't know.
It comes into play.
Yeah.
It's going to affect your decision making of like, do I want to press forward, or do I want to go back and get my heals? Because guys aren't going to respawn, but now I'll get less souls for what I'm doing.
Right. It's almost like there's the framework there to make like a 4 out of 5 game.
The problem with it is like the combat itself. It's like, okay.
Combat is...
I mean, we've discussed this. My opinion is Souls games don't have good combat to begin with, right?
They're very basic,
It's not like... they're not bad.
No, yeah.
But it's like, okay,
you compare to something like Devil May Cry 5 or Bayonetta.
Those are very combo-based, though. That's a completely different combat
I know,
system.
I'm just saying, if you're talking about like fun combat in a game, like, there's doors, Even Lies of P, I think, is a nice in-between, where it's like, you kind of have like some cool combo-y stuff. You have your special arms. Sekiro is probably a great example.
I think Sekiro is more of an advancement of the combat.
Yeah, because it's a form of combat versus what Souls games try to do, which is like, hey, give you some tools for you to,
well, and even like they introduce like
with
weapon arts or whatever, and it's like you get to Elden Ring, and it's like, yeah, dude, I used the
moon
blade slash, and that's
Elden
what
Ring
I do.
is cool in the way that you can kind of, tack on like the jumping attacks and your heavies, and you're like that was, I mean, if we're talking about Souls game and having more complex, mechanics or whatever, that is like as interesting as that formula gets, at least by FromSoft.
The way that
Sekiro.
I see like Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, all their combat systems is that it's like the framework of a good combat system. Yes. But it's like, hey, this is like, if at its base level, interesting, like, the back and forth with, getting in there, knowing your wind-ups and when you can attack guys, and especially in like the Souls games compared more like less so Bloodborne, where it's like, you have a bevy of like magics that you can use that can buff you, or like, you can approach combat in different ways. It's a framework of a really interesting combat system that you get to something like Sekiro, and it's like, okay, that framework is still there. The fundamentals of the combat system are present, because that's what Dark Souls combat is. It's a fundamental system. And then they enhance it with like, you've got moves.
Right.
The Ichimonji. Yes. You've got stuff now that you can do on top of just the basic combat system.
Yeah.
So Souls games don't have good combat to begin with, and then you get into Lords of the Fallen, and it's like, bro,
dude, the weighty. All right, so the best way I can describe it is like, it is the weirdest, most 50-50 combo of weighty and floaty that like I could possibly put to imagine. Like
it's almost Demon Souls-esque.
It almost is, because it has that floaty nature to it where things don't quite hit right, there's not much impact with a lot of your actions, but the fucking way in which you like swing your weapons and like move around is so like, dude, like you swing your hammer and your guy's like, and it's like, but then you hit the dude and it's like, ink, and you're like, like, what the fuck, dude?
One of the things that I really have struggled with is the rolling and sprinting in the game.
Yeah,
it's so fucked up. Like I'll be in combat, and it was really bad during that second boss.
The commander, the one with the shields.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so there were points where I'm like, okay,
I know this game, dude.
I want to sprint away from this guy. And I'm like, okay, let me hold the sprint button first, and then I'll run backwards, and like I'll sprint away from him. That's not what happens. You're locked onto him. You're still strafing.
Yeah, that does not work.
Like, it's like, okay, that didn't work. And then as soon as you release the sprint button, X, your guy just rolls. And it's like, bro, I could have input a bunch of different commands between those 2 points, but as soon as I let go of that X button, my guy's gonna roll. And it's like, oh my God, it feels so bad.
I actually am using the alternate control scheme, which doesn't have that problem, but I used your control, the default one at first. The alternate control scheme puts sprint. You just spill on yourself?
No.
The alternate control scheme puts sprint on L3 and roll on circle. Or
that's worse.
D.
That's like Souls games.
It is, but the sprint being on a different button from your roll solves the problem that you're talking about, where sprint is a dedicated sprint button and it's not tied. So, if I'm fucking up my sprint, I'm not going to suddenly roll. It's a separate input. So that problem hasn't happened to me since like the beginning of the game, but I immediately didn't like the way it was implemented in that game. I also just don't like roll on any button other than circle. FYI, when I talk about controls in video games, I will always use, John knows this, but I will always use PlayStation controls.
Why do you do that?
Because if I say A, B, X, or Y, those are fucking switched up depending on whether you're playing on Nintendo Switch or an Xbox or some other fucking garbage, other planetary fucking controller. Whereas square, triangle, X, and circle The only problem is X, because if I say, oh yeah, I press X, now that could be anything. Like, you don't know what fucking, if you don't know what console I'm talking about and I say X, that could be in one of 3 positions.
Well, and
But
also,
if I say circle, oh, you're talking about the B button, which is the no button. It's the
no. So you know how like in,
but on Nintendo it's different.
but you know how like in JP,
Yeah,
like,
circle is yes. Yeah,
So in
they've changed that. That was an old thing. That is not a modern thing. They've really standardized on controls, but that was definitely the case for a long time.
they've done that because the PlayStation 5 sells way more in the West than it does in the East.
Yeah, and so they're like,
okay.
oh fuck it, we'll just
Okay,
well,
yeah, because I was
to-
curious,
yeah.
like, oh, in games where circle is yes and X is no in JP, but
Yeah.
X is yes and circle is no in
the West, everywhere else.
why? Like, is it just like confirm, like menuing and stuff that's flipped, or is it like
I don't know.
controls?
I actually saw something about this recently that was kind of interesting. That was like, oh, the icons that were picked were specifically picked to map to their general purpose, and the idea is like X is no, circle is yes, triangle is head, and square is like something else. I don't know. Like it was fucked up. I'm definitely getting that wrong, but it does make me wonder if maybe in those original games, like, oh, like let's say Dark Souls was on the PS2 or whatever, like, oh, is X your roll button? I think the answer is unknown. Travis?
Also,
He's not here today.
it's interesting and weird that like in the West, X became the like default accept button. There's nothing about it that's like, oh,
yeah,
X means accept.
No, I and I was gonna say maybe it has to do with placement. I'm like, oh, maybe they're trying to, but I'm like, no, Nintendo has always had their accept at the top right, or well, the right.
Well, okay, the PlayStation 1 came out around the
like
GameCube?
what, 96?
Was that the GameCube? Or was
PlayStation
that
1? No, PlayStation 1
Nintendo
came
64?
out 64. Yeah,
So
right around
Nintendo
then.
64, the A button was the bottom button, right? That's
64.
yeah. So there was.
I know that
on the
Nintendo
right panel of the controller, there's an A and a B. It's blue and green, and then there's the C stick, but it's not a stick. It's just the directional buttons. And so I believe
the N64 controller is fucking weird, bro.
yeah. So the blue button, I believe, is A, and
It
that
is.
was accept.
That is oh, we are way too close. This is gonna sound bad in post. It probably sounds bad now.
So the Nintendo 64 controller had accept in the same position as where.
Yeah, so I wonder if it was that where people are used to the bottom of their thumb hitting, and so in the West they're like, oh yeah, got all these stupid white people don't know how to hold a controller.
Because older controllers, you go older than Nintendo 64, and then you've got Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Dreamcast was GameCube. That was past Nintendo 64.
SNES had it. Well, these are some fucking not real ones. Let's look at a real one. Yeah, A up at the top right, which is so exactly how it is like today on like the Switch. They do A, B, right bottom, and then X, Y top left. And it's literally flipped on Xbox. Like Xbox is it's A at the bottom, B at the right, Y is triangle, and X is square or whatever,
It's crazy to me because I think the Xbox is, if you're going to use A, B, X, and Y, makes the most sense.
Yeah, it does. And it's the same as PlayStation's in the sense that, like, oh, it's the layout is essentially the same, It's just like the symbols that are different. But yeah, so that's why I like to do that. What were we talking about before?
Lords of the Fallen.
Yeah, so backing way, 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 way up. So I was playing the game. I played it. I beat the first 2 bosses and then was just like, fuck this. I don't want to be alive anymore. So I
had another comment on the controllers.
You want to go now?
Yeah, so the A and the B, both accessible by the thumb, right? The same thumb.
By the
right?
thumb.
Right. Accept and decline, whatever you're going to do.
Yeah.
Right there. X and Y. Y is on the Y axis, up and down. X is on the
That's a good
horizontal
point.
axis.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It does make more sense.
Okay, go back to Lords of the Fallen.
Okay, Lords of the Fallen. I bounced off the game, like you mentioned. Just giving it a little bit
1
more
out of
context.
5. Bounced off.
I bounced off, rated it a 1 out of 5 on my backlogged. Shout out backlogged. And I uninstalled it and installed the sequel and started playing it and immediately was like, oh my God, this game feels so good. But then I was talking about the game and I said like, oh, it was terrible. And you were like, what made it so bad or something? You said something and I was like, I'll pay you $300 if you can beat that game. And you accepted that challenge immediately.
Yeah, because I don't think the
like,
game's
what?
that bad.
Yeah. Well, but you didn't know yet, but you thought there's no way it could be that bad.
Based on what I had known about the game, I was confident that it was not that bad. So I was like, I'm pretty sure that game's
and
not
I now
long.
agree with you. And but yeah, I originally was like, I can't do this. But then watching you play the game, first of all, you picked the default starting class, whereas Trav convinced me to play as like the rogue, which was like lightweight, lower health, more stamina, starting. And
Rookie mistake.
It was, yeah, I knew
You're
it.
playing
I
something,
knew it.
If you're playing
I knew
something
it.
and you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be a scuffed experience.
Play the default.
You play the warrior, the most basic thing that you can do. You play that and it's smooth sailing.
Totally agree. And that was my initial thought. I've actually tried 3 classes. So my first class...
There's only 3.
Yeah, but you can mix and match like the classes and the starting equipment. So what I originally did was I started warrior spells, and I chose the cleric or whatever that starts with a hammer as the equipment. And I started playing. I made it 10 minutes into the game. Was killing some dudes. Hadn't even gotten to like the boss or anything. And Trav came in, and he was like, "Oh, like was there class selection?" I was like, "Yeah, blah blah blah." I was like, I don't really like this class. Like the hammer just felt so bad. And he was like, yeah, start over.
All of the weapons feel bad though.
Exactly. So that's why I was like, yeah, all right, let me try like the rogue. Like I already tried like a heavy hammer, So, well, Trav was the one that chose, but I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And then that's when I made it all the way to the second boss, bounced off. Watching you play as the starting warrior class with, the warrior magic stuff. And just seeing the way that the games appeared to feel, I was like, that seems way more legit. Reinstalled the fucking game and then started playing basically side by side with you. And was like, it's rough. It's for sure rough. But you're right. It's not that bad.
I really struggle with like, is this a 3 out of 5 game or is this like a 2 out of 5 game?
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Because it's like the things that I like about the game, the other decent Souls-likes don't do well, which is like, hey, that feeling of it almost has that Dark Souls 1 feeling of you're in that second level and there's all these different ways you can go. And so after beating the commander, I didn't go that way. I went back into the catacombs because I'm like, well, I unlocked this area, so I'll go through here. And then as I'm exploring that, I find all the exits out of the catacombs and I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of ways I can go. And I'm pretty sure that some of these loop back to where I've been.
Yep.
But still, that's a very Dark Souls 1-esque
It's
world
an aspect that, when we talked about Lies of P.
Doesn't have that.
Lies of P doesn't have that and really doesn't feel like a Souls game in the exploration, whereas Lords of the Fallen actually, I think, generally succeeds. We'll see. I mean, if I'm at the end of the game, then it doesn't. It's fine. Game's way too short. But yeah, I totally agree with you.
Well, yeah, it's like what we talked about last week with, in my opinion, what makes the Souls games really unique in that open world combat space.
I spit all over my mic when I talk, so I have to wipe it up.
Is it's the exploration, it's the world design, it's the interweaving of levels and stuff that makes it feel like, oh, I don't know where the level stops and starts.
Is it the NPC cutscenes and dialogue choices?
Right, no. It's the exact same in like Elden Ring, where it's like, Elden Ring has a little bit more of like, I know when I'm in a different zone.
Yeah.
But as far as like, when does the level start and stop? Not totally clear. When does
Right.
Stormvale Castle like really start?
Yeah,
Because you could make an argument that it's like it's as soon
It
as
has
you
the
go through the
approach, it has
gate.
the-
Yeah, it's everything leading up to it as well as when you're in it.
And technically, it's once the fucking text comes up on the screen. The biggest thing that I noticed with Lords of the Fallen in that regard is and it's a problem that I have, is that the enemies respawn when you leave zones. So the enemies generally only respawn when you die. Otherwise,
It would be interesting to make it so they only
They-
respawn
when
if
you die.
Yeah.
But instead, you can also like exit clear zone boundaries where they show a loading screen, which is something that, like, hey, yeah, like Souls games don't do that unless you're like, oh, I'm going into the painted world.
They go through great lengths to hide loading
yeah,
screens.
yeah. Whereas this game, it's like, dude, when you go into the catacombs, there's a door. When you leave the cathedral at the start, like, and so the game
you
really
hold
is
the
broken
button
up.
and it says leave, and you watch the button fill up, and then you hit a loading screen. Like it's very.
Oh yeah, so that's the other thing about the alternative control scheme, is that there's no button holds. It gets rid of all of them.
Why?
I love it.
It's so weird because Souls games don't do that.
I know.
And so why would you make that as part of your default?
Especially your default, yeah.
That trend has been going on way too fucking long in games.
The fact that Lords of the Fallen was there,
That's 10 years ago.
dude. Like, oh my god! And was it already popping at that time?
Yeah.
Was that,
Yes, it's been going on that long.
I hate it. It's so bad. If you are one of those people that likes, like, oh, I love hold X or hold A to confirm, I don't.
Don't watch this. Go do something else.
Like, subscribe, follow.
Nope. Don't. I don't want your.
Look,
No.
he doesn't. I do.
So don't do it.
So, flip a coin.
Are you heads or tails? I'm tails.
Damn it. Yeah, that game is it really is decent. I lean more toward a 2 rather than a 3, but particularly due to technical issues. Because
I haven't had those, and so that makes sense. That
you haven't had any. Well, you had the game crash.
No, I
right
haven't.
at the start, and haven't you been getting those black screens?
That's a different thing.
Oh, okay. Well, for me, all right, yeah. So you're playing on PC. I also noticed that everything looks better on PC. Does it look like it's running at 60 or no?
Run smooth.
Okay, mine is clearly running at 30 and has like a really bad upscaling effect. Like it looks like Bloodborne. You know how Bloodborne looks, where it's very grainy. It looks like that for
Kind
me.
of like the stream.
No, the stream. It's okay.
Whatever.
But yeah, so I've had insane technical issues where okay, when I first started the game, very very beginning, plays a cutscene. Your guy does the thing where he looks up, and then it's like, I mean, the cutscenes are so bad.
I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah, fucking, you go talk to that guy at the door. The door's locked. You gotta go find the key.
Kelso.
Yeah, Kelso, Kaslo, whatever his name is.
Kelso.
It's Kelso.
Shout out Scrubs, Bob Kelso.
Oh, I was gonna say shout out that '70s show. That's a character. Oh, that guy is the guy that got
The Raper.
again,
Shout out
dude.
Tim Allen.
Shout out Tim Allen, dude. That's a good. I'll put that one on a shirt. I'm trying to, I'm taking notes on ideas we can put on shirts. So yeah, right at the start of the game, I go talk to that guy, and it's showing his dialogue at the bottom of the screen because I have subtitles on, but he's not saying anything. And for a moment, I was like, "Oh, this game is just cheap. It's pulling a Pokemon. There's no voice acting in the non cutscenes. It's because it wasn't a cutscene. It was like hey, you're talking with him. You can choose dialogue options." But the way he was kind of like talking, I was like, is there supposed to be audio here? But I kept playing. And then I noticed something else weird with the audio. I forget what it was, but I was like, what the fuck? And then Trav had me restart the game. And when I went and talked to the guy, he fucking is talking and there's audio. I was like, that was a bug? Oh my God. And then I've had multiple bugs since then. So after that, you get like this gauntlet really early. I walk up to the gauntlet, pick it up, and then like nothing's happening after. Like it plays a little cutscene, and then my guy's just standing there, and my guy won't move. So it looks like the game's frozen, but you can see animations in the world happening, but my guy's animations aren't happening. He's just standing there like fixed. I'm like, this looks fucked up. Is it loading? Like, and I waited like a minute.
Do you think it's a PlayStation 5 thing? Do you think there's something where it's like cross-gen and it's fucked up?
Maybe that's fucking it up.
It's
It could
so
also just be
weird.
console.
It's so weird the number of bugs that you've run into where it's like, I haven't had a single bug.
It's very possible. Yeah, it could be a PS5. Shout out Sony. And
that's the only thing I can think of. That's like, oh, there's some cross-gen incompatibility. That's like it's compatible, but
like, hey, like of all the games that wouldn't be compatible,
like
yeah,
my game hasn't crashed.
So my game has crashed once. I'll get to
my
that.
game hasn't had audio bugs. My game hasn't had any animation bugs.
So that's the thing, is it wasn't just an animation bug. My guy's frozen. Nothing's happening. Guy in my chat on Twitch, shout out twitch.tv. He was like, oh, it's supposed to have like a text pop up here explaining to you like how the gauntlet works. Like, what?
Oh, so it was like there's something wrong with like the flags.
Something was like fucked up. Yeah. And so I restarted the game, lost all the progress I had made since leaving the cathedral.
So that's another thing the game does weird is the checkpoint systems, but we can talk about that later. Keep going.
Yeah, we'll talk about the autosaves. We'll get back to that. But yeah, I had to redo that whole area up to the gauntlet, and then the next time I picked up the gauntlet, the text box showed up. My guy still like kind of froze weird for a minute. I was like, is it happening again? And then it didn't. I was like, oh, okay. Super annoying. Then I'm in the fucking catacombs. I'm fucking running around.
Catacombs is how they say
catacombs.
It. Shout out catacombs. That's how they say it in the game.
Okay. Let me
say it.
Back up. I also had the audio bug happen multiple times throughout the game. Like as I played, I noticed like, oh, I'll go talk to people and they're not talking, and I'm like, God damn it, it's happening again. And then the problem is I have to go get a checkpoint because I'll lose my progress if I don't, and then quit the game, turn it back on, and then it fixes it. Super fucking annoying. But then I'm fucking going through the catacombs, and I fucking run around. This dude comes and attacks me, and all of a sudden the audio just goes. I was like, what the fuck is going on? And like no other audio is happening. It's just this one fucking horrible sound. And I'm like, what the fuck do I do? I pause the game. The sound's still happening, but when I paused, it like gets quieter because like the sound in the game gets quieter when you pause. So I'm like, what the fuck? I go back to like the PlayStation menu. So like, so the game's not running. I mean, it's running in the background and the audio stops. I'm like, okay, it's not my PlayStation. It's the game. I go back into the game. I unpause. I'm like, I go to the settings. I try like changing the volume. I'm like, what's going on? I unpause. I move around a little bit, and suddenly the game just full blown crashes, like shuts down, and it's like, oh, want to send a report, or whatever. I'm like, what the fuck? Load the game back up. Lost 30 minutes of progress. Fucking so annoying.
It's so weird. Because it's like the opposite of what you normally see on PC and console.
So if I didn't have those things, I would say, yeah, it's a 3 out of 5. It's decent. It's got some
problems. I don't have those things, and I'm still torn on whether it's like a 3 or a 2.
Yeah.
It's like it is super fucking clunky.
Yeah.
It's not a great experience. The story stuff sucks. The
story, dude, I sent a screenshot of, so I don't even know if you've looked at this screen in the game, but if you pause and you go over to like
the
lore tab.
Plot.
Yeah, you go over to the lore tab, and there's all these different, like, categories, and, like, it's basically all the audio logs in the game that you find.
And it's also, like, a compendium. Like, they have, like, the enemies and stuff. Like, it's...
Yeah. And so I scroll down, and I was just looking at it for the first time, and I get to one that just says, the plot, and then it's fucking,
all
like, 3 cards, and they all say question marks. And I was like, that's accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, like, what?
What's happening? Yeah, you're looking for Antanas, is all I know.
Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, if you went back and you replayed and you paid attention, that you realize that they're like, we must find Antanas. I don't even know who that is. I think he's like the king or something, King Antanas, or he's like somebody. And so like from the beginning, you're looking for Antanas, but then your buddy gets injured, and it's like, yeah, go find Kelso, and you're like, totally lose track of like what the plot even is, but you don't even have comprehension of what.
I feel like the plot is even more esoteric than like Dark Souls 1.
It is.
Where your introduction to the plot is like, don't die. Don't go hollow.
Yeah.
Like just don't do that.
Dark Souls 1 at least opens up with like a lore cinematic. This game opens up with a cinematic
of a guy blowing up a giant dinosaur.
He's like fighting a dinosaur thing, and then he doesn't even kill it. The mountain starts getting fucked up, and then they stop fighting, and then it's like, it's so bad. It goes, a different time, a different war, and then just fucking cuts to when you're playing, and you're that guy, and you're like, what the fuck? Just like the most minimal context possible. Yes, so esoteric.
It's convinced me though that, like, you know, you're probably right in the sense that Lies of P's a 4 out of 5 game.
Because the bar is fucking weird.
And yeah, and it's piggybacking so hard of just like the Souls formula where it's like, that's like a 3 out of 5 baseline.
Yeah.
Even if you fuck up a bunch of stuff.
Right.
And so it's like, it's the worst Souls game is probably a 4 out of 5. That's Dark Souls 2
and the
or
worst
Dark Souls 3.
Souls-like, apparently
3 out of 5.
3 out of 5. Garbage. I mean, and the reality is like, hey, you know, we're usually pretty critical, overly critical to an extent, but 3 out of 5 does align with the meta and open critic scores for that game. You know,
surprisingly it does, because usually, like I would also give a game like Starfield a 3 out of 5.
Yeah,
that doesn't align with the Metacritic
to the
scores.
point where like, I almost want to say, well, Starfield might have to be a 4 out of 5, but the reality is that they're just excelling in different areas. Like Starfield is a much less fun game, I think, despite way more polish, right? Or do you think they're equal levels? Like, how are they both 3s?
Think Lords of the Fallen is fun?
I mean, I'm playing it. I'm gonna play more today. Yeah, it is.
So it comes down to
baffling.
I hate using this word because it's become like toxified in games because it's a way to monetize people, but it's engagement. And Lords of the Fallen's engaging. You're playing it,
engaging.
And in the exact same way that you do in Dark Souls 1, you're
bad,
creating that.
You're still
it's
having,
bad but engaging.
And you're like, you're almost trying to. The challenge of the game is, and I've been thinking about this while playing it. I'll feel like it feels like an achievement when I beat a boss, and it's not because the boss is hard. It's because like, I did it.
I powered through it. I got farther.
Yeah. Like when I fucking got through the catacombs, it was like, oh my God, I'm finally done. I don't have to do this again. And then I went back and I was like, oh my God, the fucking catacombs again.
And so like I would put Starfield as almost like the opposite, where it's like
it's not engaging.
It's not engaging, but it is polished.
Polished, yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, those both end up coming out to like a 3 out of 5.
The reality is, for me personally, Starfield is closer to a 2 because like I'm not engaged at all. And if I'm not, same thing with Harry Potter, like that, obviously a higher quality game, both of which are potential Game of the Year candidates.
Neither are.
Well, yeah, especially now with Spider-Man 2 getting like the scores
Spider-Man 2, and Mario Wonder.
Yeah,
Alan Wake 2 still has to come out. Maybe that's a fucking slam dunk.
Yeah, I mean, but this year's been crazy. But those are both really high quality games, Starfield and Harry Potter Wizarding World.
Are they?
Yeah, I would say they're high quality. They're highly polished, loved by many people. Like the majority, you know, like good review scores in general. You know, compared to something like Lords of the Fallen. But I still like Lords of the Fallen more than those games because, well, I was gonna say because I didn't bounce off of Lords of the Fallen.
You did.
But I did.
But it's
bounce
because
off.
it's a Souls-like, and it's because the soul, and it's a Souls. Well, I was gonna say it's a Souls-like in a way. It's a Souls-like in a way that's more interesting than like a lot of games are just in general, where it's like, yeah, there's
Souls elements.
Yeah, that the engagement that you get as a player of just like that mental checklist of, this is where I've been. These are the things that I can do. This is where I want to go next.
There's that door over here.
Oh, I want to. Before I do this, I want to do this.
Yeah.
Like maintaining that thought process.
It's a huge aspect,
and it's happening consistently throughout the game, and it's constantly building on itself in major ways where it's like, oh, there's obviously
Yeah.
major pathways, but then there's also minor pathways where you're
There's
like,
even little things that like, hey, you know, that door at the beginning of the game that neither of us opened that I also still haven't opened.
can you go there?
Like, hey, like, but it looked like there was
a guy there.
Yeah.
There was an enemy there.
So it
Can
makes
you
me
go
wonder,
there?
hey, maybe at some point you are going to loop back around, or maybe I'll be incentivized to go exploring once I find some key, you know. And that's very Dark Souls 1, where like, hey, you do the Asylum.
I don't think we'll go back there, but maybe.
You're probably right, but I don't know. You know,
Yeah, maybe. It's
there's already been some like interesting looping stuff where I'm like, oh, maybe this whole game is gonna have you kind of looping around all these areas.
So I
don't know.
wonder if, because Lords of the Fallen 2, the bit that you've played of that seems much more mechanically sound. Obviously, there's like a time
Yes.
thing there. It's 10 years, a lot of time to.
different development studio as well. Same, not even same publisher, because the first game was published by Bandai Namco. The second game is published by somebody else. But anyway, like there is whoever owns the IP rights is making the sequel, but different developer and different publisher.
My assumption is Lords of the Fallen 2 not as interconnected as Lords of the Fallen 1. I think that is probably the reason why Lords of the
So
Fallen
far.
1 is bad, is because it came out right after Dark Souls, and
It was almost
that
a little
is the
too
thing.
ambitious.
That's the thing that they honed in on as like, oh, Demon Souls came out, it was successful, critically received well, but there wasn't the
Yeah.
zeitgeist that there was of Dark Souls
Yeah.
1. And the reason why Dark Souls 1 blew up in the way it did is because that world
It was a world design.
interconnectivity.
Honestly, I think that
And so Lords of the Fallen comes out, they copy that. The game suffers immensely because they tried to do what Dark Souls 1 did, and they kind of did.
I would say like the world exploration is like a 4 out of 5 in
Best
itself.
part about the game by far.
It's not a 5 because like I mean,
you know what a
there's-
5 is, and
there's-
it's Dark Souls.
it's Dark Souls. It's coming back to Firelink Shrine from the fucking cathedral and elevator and being like, holy shit, or looping around Darkroot Garden from the back path and realizing, oh my god, I'm in Darkroot Garden, or even like the DLC, like being like, holy shit, this is Darkroot Garden. You know, like there's a lot of world like intrigue and just like, oh my god, like the discovery in that game is just awesome. But Lords of the Fallen does have moments of opening a door and going, oh, I'm here.
This is where I am.
Oh, and then this is going to connect back, and your mind starts doing this little, you know, and you're like, oh, I like that. At least I do, you know.
So I think that's what they were trying to copy.
Yeah.
And they did it moderately
okay.
successfully.
Yeah.
But everything else in the game completely suffers. And
Everything.
no other Souls-like has ever attempted, even the Souls games have never attempted to be Dark Souls 1 again.
Right.
Because like, no, that's the pinnacle. That's the
Yeah.
ambition.
Yeah.
There are elements of this formula that are still really captivating that you can execute on, like Liza P.
Yeah,
fairly
yeah.
linear. The combat's
Yeah,
still
you
really
can you
good.
can strip away this. You can do this.
The Dark
you know,
Souls
yeah.
the Bloodborne-esque, atmosphere. Liza P.
Yeah.
has a little bit. Like
Yep.
there are still elements that you can
Yep.
rip and combine to make an interesting game. But
Yeah.
that world design of Dark Souls 1, just Souls games don't try to do that anymore.
No, yeah. I mean, and you know, if you look at something like Elden Ring, it's like, okay, it's doing something completely different that is also really awesome, you know. And it's like, oh yeah, Stormvale Castle has a little bit of that. That's like, oh my god, I'm looping back here, but it's closer to something like Lords of the Fallen.
Or
Like-
Demon Souls, where it's like, you're in this
oh yeah, you
place.
loop, and that's the checkpoint to go this way or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, yeah, but like Dark Souls 1 is, the
Dark
fact
Souls 1's like you're halfway through the game and you loop back to Firelink Shrine and you're like,
in Dark Souls
"What?"
1, all right, let's just talk about this for a second. In Dark Souls 1, you beat the Asylum Demon, you come to the fucking Firelink Shrine, you can go back, you can immediately
Go back to the Asylum.
Asylum right away. if you, which I'm pretty sure I found that on my own when I first played that game, because I'm like, it looks like you can jump over there, you know, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so you can go back to there. You can do the catacombs. You can go through the default path, which is called The Way to the Hellkite Drake. It is called the Undead Burg. Go through the Undead Burg, or you can go down to you can take the elevator down by the Firekeeper to New Londo. You can also so you could do New Londo.
You go to Blighttown,
or you can go to Blighttown if you have the Master Key. Like, you remember last week we were talking about Dark Souls 2 and how Dark Souls 2 might be the most open or whatever. What the fuck was what was I talking about? It's Dark Souls 1. It's Dark Souls 1 basically through the whole game. Because immediately you have that, and then as you make progress in certain zones, different things either dead end or open up, you know? Like, dude, if you do Blighttown first, which, I mean, first of all, let's recognize that doing Blighttown first is the equivalent of doing the Gulch first, which we talked about last week as well.
it's objectively
that,
wrong. Like you went the wrong way.
chance of you doing that first is slim, right? And the game is really trying to push you not to. But the fact that you can is...
The game's really trying to push you to the Undead Burg. Everything they do.
Yeah, in basically every way. To the point where in Lords of the Fallen, I really thought that when I did the Catacombs, I thought it was the same as the Dark Souls Catacombs in the sense that, like, I'm not fucking supposed to be here. Like, you did the same thing as me. You went to the Catacombs, you know, basically right when you can, right? You get the key and you go there, right?
Yeah.
There's the two guys, and you can choose which. Oh, by the way, on my...
I didn't save either of them.
Yeah, I saved one. It just gives you like a XP and whatever.
They both turned for me.
You might have gotten an extra item that I didn't then, because if they both die, then they both have drops, because the guy that died had a unique drop.
I don't know that I got a drop from either of them.
The game's all fucked up. But yeah, I got there and you start exploring around. And it's like, holy shit, dude, the enemies here are not even close to like how easy everything else has been.
Significantly stronger.
But if you go after the commander, you start running into the shield guys, and then you're like, what the fuck? Like, those are the hard dudes. But the biggest problem with the Catacombs is just like how cramped it is. It's just like camera is in your asshole. You're turning corners. Fucking dudes are smacking on you. There's the weird dog things fucking jumping at you. Guys throwing shit, shooting at you. Like, the first time I was there, I got overwhelmed and just started running, looking for a checkpoint, and was just like, there's so many fucking guys ever. Like, I was running, and dudes will chase you for like ever.
Yeah, they don't stop.
Yeah, they will at a certain point, but like, no, that way more than you would expect. To the point where, like, yeah, I was running, and I ended up dying. But that area felt so overwhelming. But then going the other path was also slightly overwhelming, you know? And then eventually did teach me, like, oh, how to deal with those shield enemies and yada, yada. So it's like, okay, yeah, like, I did try to do the Catacombs too early. But still, like, the game does have a weird difficulty spike after the commander. Like, it really, like, first of all, the commander is just, I don't like that boss. It's my least favorite boss in the game so far. My favorite's the guy in the graveyard. I liked him.
That boss was way too easy, but...
He is easy, but he's kind of neat.
I like that he had a mechanic.
Yeah.
That you inappropriately called a gimmick when I was fighting him.
It's a little gimmicky.
You're like, oh, it's a gimmick boss? I'm like, it's not.
No,
a gimmick boss is defeated by the gimmick. That boss has a mechanic.
He has a mechanic that allows that he'll one-shot.
There was a pop-up that happened during one of the loading screens.
Like an ad?
And it said, like, every boss has a special, unique way to beat them. I remember,
I didn't see that, but I saw it when you played.
Yeah, and I'm like, what? Like, and so the next boss I fought after I saw that, so like I'm assuming that was the mechanic for, what was that boss's name? The Watcher, the Warden,
All right, so that's another problem we can discuss very quickly.
The boss names are so generic and bad.
They couldn't be worse.
But whatever that boss was, like, was hiding in the things, is that the unique way to beat that boss? Is that...
I'm going to guess no, because But maybe,
because maybe
it
that's
seemed
all
like you had to do that.
Maybe it's all it's saying is that it's like each boss has a mechanic, and so if you exploit the mechanic, you can beat the boss. Because then the next one I fought was a champion, which is the big guy with
the guy underground in the catacomb.
Yeah, it looks like he has drill hands or something. But yeah. And he
charges
into the walls and stuff, and when he hits the wall, the whole screen shakes. And
it's
like,
true.
Oh,
but like,
are you
what
supposed
could
to?
You possibly do?
Are you supposed to get him to run into something to like drop something on him that he like hits something and then something falls on him?
I mean, I beat that boss, and I don't think so.
Is he supposed to? There's like
he does shake the wall.
There's a whole wall that's like all wooden planks, and it's like, oh, do you have to like run him into this wall a couple times? Did you spill something?
Shout out.
I don't know. It seems like each boss does have a thing.
I spilled.
But also trying to find that thing is like, there's some, like I fucked around with that boss in the catacombs for a while, where I was like, let me try running him into different walls. Like,
you tried that?
Yeah. Like I kited him for 10 minutes and ran him into different places. I was like, I can't get him to anything to happen. I don't know what the game wants from me. This guy has a mechanic. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's you fucking max out the final spell on the warrior tree, and then the game just gets stupid. Where I'm at is so fucked up with my progression because the final, and I don't know if it's like this for all of the classes, like it's basically warrior, mage, and rogue, but they're all mages, so whatever. But like my final spell, which scales off faith, which is what I'm leveling because my weapon also scales off that. It's just like this giant hammer slam that will destroy like every fucking dude in a pretty good radius around you, and will one-shot the hardest enemies in the game. Like dudes that you could either spend 5 minutes fighting this guy, running around trying to get your positioning, or you can use your hammer slam and it's over right now. And I think it's a problem, but it's fun. Like I'm not like, oh, here we go, let me do my hammer slam. I'm like, oh, come here, and I fucking walk up to these huge dudes. But that's partially because those dudes gave me problems for a while.
It's a weird game.
It is really weird. I kind of hope it's not almost over.
I think it's short. I think it's supposed to be a short game.
I'm already right about at the 20-hour mark. I'm at like 19.
Sounds like you're probably about done.
What?
Sounds like you're probably about done.
Yeah, like hey, maybe another handful of hours. Like it's gonna start wrapping up. And I don't think I would like that. I think I'll most likely call this game a 2 by the end of it. Unless, hey, the end of the game gets like, man, it just, everything really started clicking in like a interesting way.
How could it?
Exactly. How could it?
How could it?
But the second game, I mean, I can't wait to get back to it. Seems so fun. I played that, beat the first boss. Oh, wait, no, not even. The first boss is he's like a guy.
Udex.
It's like the first boss is more like the first boss in Elden Ring. You know how there's like a little tutorial boss.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
Okay,
he's
so
just
you find
like
him, right away.
Yeah, he's just like a guy that has a boss health bar. So there's a boss like that in the second game. And then I made it to the first real boss. And I was like, holy shit! Like this game is, it's actually like. It seems to be fun. It's way more polished. It's not even close. I would argue it's more polished than most Souls games. It's very, very, very good. But it's so different, man. Like it's not this. It's the only thing that I noticed that's similar is the run speed. Like hey, you run pretty fast in both games when you're sprinting, and the XP multiplier. But the XP multiplier is handled differently in the second game. It's just like, hey, it goes up when you're killing more dudes and it goes down when you're not. Like that's it. Like it's much
better.
more. What?
It's almost better.
It is better, and it's also always on screen.
That's worse.
No, it's just right under your souls. I mean, it's only always on screen when your HUD's on screen. It's always in the HUD.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, hey, right under your souls or whatever that's called. Just see a little time. 1.0, 1.0. And then it's like, hey, as you're playing, you can be like, hey, what's my multiplier at? Because I've had times where I wonder that, what's my multiplier at, when I'm not paying attention. Because in the first game, you have to keep that in mind. Otherwise, if it's not on screen, you're not fucking. There's zero UI for it. It only pops up when you kill guys in the screen. When you get XP, it's like, hey, this is what your current XP multiplier is. But it also seems to not go down like at all, does it?
Based on what you've seen between the second one and the first one, like, do you think the second one is like a step up in every way?
The only way that I'm unsure about is exploration. The exploration has already been okay. But I am very, very early in the second game. So, like...
Exploration's pretty good in Lords of the Fallen 1 very, very early, though.
But I'm basically still before the first commander, or the first
warden. First warden, yeah.
So, like...
Yeah, that first level in Lords of the Fallen isn't anything good.
Yeah, it's nothing crazy. I mean, it's a little different because there's technically like a little tutorial area first that's literally like learn the controls. And I'm pretty sure there's an option to skip it when you're making your character. It's like, oh, like, do you want to do the tutorial? But the most interesting thing about the second game is your lantern that allows you to, at any point, look between like your world and the world of the dead, or whatever. It's called Umbral, which also so far is not mentioned or doesn't exist at all in any lore or anything in the first game.
Yeah, in the first
they
one,
were literally just like, let's just use the basis of the first game and then just do something completely different in the second. But it's really, really interesting where it's like, the longer you're in there, the harder it gets. But you can also use it to kind of, like, I can fully enter it, but now if I die, I'm dead. But anytime you do die, normally you enter Umbral. There's a lot of interesting little connective tissue that makes it work, and that in a way makes the exploration way more interesting than the first game, because it's like at all times you're exploring two worlds with unique challenges and switching between the two, but you can only switch out of Umbral by dying or finding a point of like, oh, this is a spot where I can go back to the real world. Versus when you're in the real world, at any point you can basically kill yourself and go into Umbral. It like takes half your health, and then you have to like gain it back, and it's a whole thing. So I have much higher hopes for the second game, but I am really happy that I watched you play a little bit of the first one and went, you know what? Fuck it, dude. I'm gonna beat the first game too. Like, I think that when all's said and done, I won't have regretted it. Whereas when I first bounced off the game, I thought, can't believe I spent a couple hours playing this. I was pissed.
It's not bad.
It's not. The technical issues aside, yeah.
I don't know that it's good, but it's not bad.
Right. Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not good. But I don't know. It's kind of fun. Like you said, Lords of the Fallen fun? Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
It's borderline fun.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. Well, now's probably a good time for a break, would you say?
Break.
Lords of the Fallen. More like...
We'll be right back.
Break. Man, I do really like... I think they're actually are going down very smooth. And I like the can, you know. There are these Founders Oktoberfest. They really got this nice like fall aesthetic to them too, you know, and they have like this almost like kingly look, like there's a crown. Just makes me feel like a lord of the fall when I'm drinking it. When I'm, you know, because of the way that the can looks. And, you know, it's the colors. And What do you think? Well, speaking of Lords of the Fallen, some more. Um, you said something earlier about, oh yeah, Dark Souls being a 5 out of 5 in regards to its world design, right? Like, oh, that's a 5 out of 5. I'm curious, and now playing Lords of the Fallen, me playing Liza P, talking with you about it, you seeing a bunch of it, seeing how these different games kind of all succeed and fail in ways. It's become really apparent to me that the perfect Souls-like does not exist from my perspective. As much as we like to say Sekiro's a 5 out of 5, no Souls game, no Souls-like, whatever, has been able to put all of the best pieces together. I'm curious what you think. Like, what would that game look like if there was going to be your dream Souls-like? Oh, it's the Souls-like to end all Souls-like. What does that game look like to you? Is it more similar to something like Sekiro or Dark Souls or Elden Ring? What aspects of Lords of the Fallen does this hypothetical game employ?
None from Lords of the Fallen.
None from Lords of the Fallen. All right.
It's interesting though because Sekiro, I think, is the closest they've gotten to like hitting everything.
What does Sekiro not hit on?
A big part of it's a difference between Sekiro and Dark Souls.
Right.
In
to
the
point
scope of what they're trying to do, where that mobility that you have in Sekiro, there's a larger element of world connectivity, where kind of everything stems off of what is it, Castle Ashina?
Ashina Castle, but yeah,
everything stems off of that castle.
Yeah. You work your way there, and then from there it's branches.
But it's very much in a big way, right? You're trouncing rooftops. You're seeing your very big passageways.
Trouncing rooftops, diving deep into the sea, ascending to the heavens.
You compare that to like Dark Souls, which is it's much more down to earth. It's a very like
there's no point in which you're like entering like this ethereal realm or something. I mean, you have like the abyss and you have the painted world of Ariamis, but it's still more grounded than like...
Yeah, I mean, you just compare like the undead Berg to like Ashina Castle, like fairly, those are the first levels in the game, really. There's a lot more going on in Undead Berg because of the slower pace of Dark Souls, that it's like, those elements that I was complaining about in Lords of the Fallen, where it's like there's a door around every corner. It's more of that in Dark Souls. It's not like that where there's a door around every corner, but you can have stuff going on in all these smaller areas.
Yeah.
Because your mobility isn't so high and because the area that you're traversing isn't so large.
Yeah.
Whereas in Sekiro, it's so big that it's like there's not a lot to explore. Like you think of like that square area at the floor of Ashina Castle, like when you're first going up it. It's like you can go around there and kill all the guys, but there's like there's not a lot to do. There's not like a lot of secret stuff. And there can't be because the area is so open and because you can get on rooftops and stuff, your vantage points are so much greater that it's harder to hide stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's a completely different objective in Sekiro. They're different games in terms of what they're trying to do.
To the point where I think a lot of people that is an aspect of the game that makes people call Sekiro not a Souls game.
And Liza P's not a Souls game.
Right. Yeah.
Not a Souls like if that's the requirement. But then, well, no, Demon Souls would still be.
Yeah, Demon Souls would still be.
It's really only Sekiro that has that, where the levels themselves don't have that level design element.
Yeah, it's very different the way it's handled in Sekiro. I mean, and there's some clear similarities, sprinkled throughout, but it is different. I almost wonder if a game, like I wonder what like a really compact Elden Ring would look like. Imagine you're like at Ashina Castle. I know that didn't really make any sense, but hear me out. You're at Ashina Castle, and you have Elden Ring's sense of, oh, there's a cave over here, and there's a catacomb here, and there's a key that I can find, and then if I use the stone sword key, I can go in here, and then but that means I have to go up here and I have to fight this enemy, and then I can, but it's all condensed into like much smaller zone with less empty space. I wonder what that would look like, or almost if like, I mean, you could say the same thing about Undead Burg rather than Ashina Castle. Like, what if Undead Burg was just riddled with, optional little areas that you could go through and find like a chest at the end and fight a little mini boss or whatever, or fight like a really lore important boss. Like, I think about an Elden Ring finding spoilers for Elden Ring, finding patches, in the fucking random cave, like as you're exploring. Like, imagine if that was much more condensed, and instead of him being in some random cave in a giant cavern, you have to ride your horse to like, get through like in any reasonable time. It's like, no, like there's like, oh, I found a cave kind of hiding.
I lean towards, it would just make Dark Souls worse.
Yeah, and that's possible.
That one of the things that works with Dark Souls is
there's a level of linearity and simplicity.
Well, we were talking about this with Lords of the Fallen when I was grinding. It's like, that natural grinding element in Souls games versus like a forced grind.
Yeah. Whereas in Elden Ring, did you grind it all in Elden Ring?
No, because you don't have to, because there's so much content.
So much shit.
And so you get into a weird spot if you're going to condense that and say, okay, let's put it in like a Dark Souls level. And you go, okay, well, do we balance stuff around people having done this content, or them having done some of this content, or them having done
you at that
none
point
of this
you
content?
do need to start implementing. At that point, I think you would need to start implementing like a form of scaling, and in true Souls game fashion, you would need that sense of scaling to also be, lore and canonical accurate, because. And I'm imagining, like, let's say you did something like that. Hey, you have all this stuff you can explore, blah, blah, blah. And maybe there's a level of scaling in which, like, no, certain bosses are they do have a floor, Like, I can't beat the game at level 1 difficulty. The last boss is always going to be level 100 or minimum or whatever, you know what I mean? But, like, they have a range. But maybe you could do a thing where, like, oh, yeah, in the way that the game is framed is that like you're collecting these souls, and as you're collecting the souls, like the demons start noticing you more, and so now like there are stronger enemies in every area, but then that creates a much harder game to design, because it's like, oh, well, this area isn't this enemy and this enemy. It's like, oh no, I'm having to swap shit out as the player, grinds or does more shit. And, so it becomes a harder game to design.
I don't think level scaling has a place in a Souls game. I think you complained about this in Dark Souls. You complained about this in Dark Souls 1 in the second half of the game when you've got...
yeah, it's a problem.
Disagree. That
you like it.
Game is deliberately designed that way, so it's...
Specifically, if we back up, the idea that if you that each of the areas in the game are scaled equivalently.
Yeah, so it's the second half of the game after you get the chalice, the
Lord Dark
Vessel.
Souls 1 or 2?
Yeah, after you get the Lord Vessel in Dark Souls 1, and you unlock Seath's area, you unlock Nito's area, you unlock the Bed of Chaos's area.
Yeah, they're
all those areas are roughly equivalent.
Yeah.
The reason that it's done that way is so that you can go down a path and say, this is too hard, let me go to one of the other ones.
But the reality is that they are all the same.
But you have to go through the beginning of the new area again. Yes. And so it's like, yeah, you are going to make a
false sense of like, because the reality is like, pushing down a path isn't going to be really much different than,
Well, if you got halfway through and you're like, hey, this is too hard now, I'm going to go to another one.
if you got halfway through, yeah.
It's very really much designed in that way to provide options.
I never play it that way, but I'm curious how that would feel. Like, hey, I made it almost to Seath or whatever. Like, I made it to the real crystal caves, and then was like, oh, what the fuck? This is hard. And then I fucking bail, and I go
Yeah,
do
that's why-
all of the Bed of Chaos.
That's why they're all scaled equivalently, is to make it so that you can bail partway through.
You play the game that way?
Yes, I've done that. That's what I did the first time I played the game.
That probably sounds right.
I went partway through the Bed of Chaos and said, this is too hard. I'm going to go to Seath's Fortress. And I went that way instead.
Seath's Fortress. Shout out Seath's Fortress.
And then I went through Seath's
Google that.
area. And then it was like, yeah, that was easier because I had done half of the Bed of Chaos already. And then I went through most of Seath's area. And I also bailed out of that. And then I went to Nito and did all of Nito and did that.
Nito's is the
section.
hardest one in Dark
No,
Souls
his is
1.
the easiest.
You think, well, that's because you played it that way.
Right. And that's
his is the hardest to take first.
That's part of the benefit of designing a game where you scale everything equivalently.
But you could argue that everything that you just described, depending on, your perspective on game design, all of what you just said could be considered negative, And I don't mean that in the sense that, anybody's opinion could be the opposite of anything. But I mean that, in a very real sense, the idea that you are, hitting these essentially, fake roadblocks that are,
they're not roadblocks, though. Like you just said,
and
that's
it
not
feels
how I played
very,
at all.
it feels very directionless, and it feels, and at the other end of the spectrum, it's or at the other end of completing all this, once you get through one of the sections, the other three are going to be much, much easier. So it's there might be an aspect of it that especially worked for you where, I kind of bounced around and then I found my groove, but then at a certain point it all starts to it flatlines, and it's not that, hey, those are bad areas. It's not that it becomes a fucking cakewalk. I don't think at any point Dark Souls 1 becomes a cakewalk, but it's it does that you might get that little peak of dopamine and then just flatline across the rest.
The only
of
exception, I mostly disagree with you on the grounds of Bed of Chaos being a gimmick boss and Seath being a gimmick boss.
Seath is
He's a gimmick boss. He's a gimmick boss.
He is well, I would argue he's a boss with a gimmick because you have to do the gimmick first, but then you just fight him like a normal boss. He's just
not
normal.
Really like a normal boss.
He's a normal boss. He's no different.
Kinda, but not really.
He's just not a great boss, is my take.
Because he's a gimmick boss.
No. But here's the thing: once you break his crystal, right, which is when you walk up and you try to hit him, it literally does no damage. He takes no damage. You break his crystal, right? Just the thing shining at the other end of the room. It's a gimmick. You have to go break his crystal, but after doing that, you never have to do it again. It's not I enter the room every time I fight this boss. I need to then...
Really shouldn't be dying to him because he's a gimmick boss with a very limited moveset because he has a gimmick.
Yeah, he has a gimmick.
And that's why he has such a reduced moveset compared to other bosses that's very basic and not very lethal and very easy to dodge all his moves, is because do the gimmick and then the boss is basically
But it's
free.
not you smack him 4 times and he's dead. It's
you have to smack him a few times, but it's not... Compared to most other bosses in the game, it's very easy.
I would say he's very similar to a boss like Gaping Dragon, and it's that's a boss earlier in the game.
I was
the very similar limited moveset. Very similar, but he's only more difficult because of your skill in the game.
No, he
because
also
when you go
around.
back and play that game, that boss is a joke. He's a joke.
Seath, I think, is one of the biggest joke
joke.
bosses in the game, way more so than the Gaping Dragon.
I feel like Trav rated that boss high.
I think that's right.
I'm gonna look at his tier list to see. Let's see if I have it.
Seath, I think, is a gimmick boss.
Oh yeah, he put him in F tier.
Yeah,
Trav said Seath
because he's a gimmick boss. He's a gimmick boss.
I agree with you. I just mean there's a clear difference between Bed of Chaos and Seath. So it's there's a level of after you deal with his gimmick, you just fight him.
No, that's what I'm disagreeing on. There is no you just fight him.
Yeah, you do just fight him.
He's not a real boss. He has 2 moves and they don't do anything.
He has about 3. Yeah.
That's not
Bed of
typical
Chaos has
for a boss.
0.
Bed of Chaos has moves.
No,
Bed of
once
Chaos,
you deal with the gimmick...
Bed of Chaos arguably
0
has
moves.
as many moves as Seath.
Once you deal with the gimmick, the fight is over in Bed of Chaos. The fight is the gimmick. That is straight up you run around, and then you smack the boss and it's over.
I don't think punching Seath in the butt is much more different than just.
It's not much.
It's easier to do than
not much
jumping
more.
over the holes to
Seath
get
is a
to
much
Beta Chaos.
easier boss, but that's just because Beta Chaos is a fucking. It's just not well designed. Like I could see a version of Beta Chaos that fully like embraces its gimmick and is well designed to the point where like, dude, Beta Chaos is an awesome boss. Like Beta Chaos's problem isn't that it's a gimmick, right? Like the gimmick in Beta Chaos is fine. It's the mechanics. And I would say that like Seath's gimmick is better. Seath has a better gimmick. He's invulnerable until you go break his crystal, right? And like until then, he's smacking you. Whereas like Beta Chaos is like, hey, dude, when you first walk into the fight, like it doesn't even attack you. You run over and you break one of the things, then you run over and you break the other thing.
Seath is as bad a boss as Beta Chaos.
They are equal.
They're both, equal. In my opinion.
Trav says Beta Chaos is a D tier.
They're
He
both,
liked that
in
boss
my
more.
opinion, terrible gimmick bosses.
Yeah, they're bad.
They both are gimmick bosses. The only boss in that section of the game that's not a gimmick boss is Nito, and I think that actually hurts the game.
What's the other boss? Oh, Four Kings.
All the bosses.
Also a gimmick boss.
All the bosses should be gimmicks entirely.
Four Kings is the best of those in terms of gimmicks, where like, hey, his gimmick is.
Four Kings isn't a gimmick boss. He's a boss with a gimmick.
I agree with that, and he has the best gimmick.
Yeah, that's an actual boss fight.
Yeah, he's an actual boss fight that has a cool gimmick.
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's gonna every time you like. He's basically a big DPS check, but yeah, he's my favorite of all of those final bosses because I think Nito is just too basic.
I think all the bosses should have been gimmick bosses, and then that deals with the problem of all the areas being scaled equally. That you make them all gimmicks. It's not
it's
a matter
more about
of,
solving the challenge.
Right, there's a problem to solve, and how do you beat this boss?
And then Gwyn's also a gimmick secretly in the sense that like you just stand there and parry him.
He's not really a gimmick.
He's not actually a gimmick,
and he shouldn't. But those four bosses should be. The fact that only two of them are, I think, is kind of a problem. But not really, because the zones are whatever.
And not really just because. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, those are bad bosses. Crossbreed Priscilla, that's a gimmick boss, right?
No, that's a boss with a gimmick.
A boss with a gimmick. What do you
Not
prefer?
A boss.
Full gimmick boss or a boss with a gimmick?
No, I like gimmick fights. I think they're more fun.
I like a better balance than Bed of Chaos. Like I think that's why I prefer.
Well, like the best one is
Kings.
the Demon Souls one.
Adjudicator.
No, the girl with the guy.
Oh, you're talking. Yeah. The end of World 5. Her name is Queen Amygdala.
Not even close.
Her name is Saint. I'm on it. It's Saint something, right?
She's the best.
Maiden Estrella.
Is that right? I don't know that that's right. She's the best gimmick boss because it's like, you can go fight the guy and fight him and not and
or you can it's hard to push around him, but you have the option to like.
It's not hard because you fight him in that area where you come up and it's all the fucking like vine thingies. It's like you can get him up there and then just run right by him and drop down and go run right past him.
That's another aspect to talk about, which is that it is different in the remake in the sense that like he is harder to skip and get around in the remake.
He's not hard to get around,
and it makes that made me wonder like, oh, like is that a downside for the remake? Maybe I'm wrong though.
Yeah, I like gimmick bosses, especially bosses where the gimmick isn't obvious and it's optional in the sense that it's like, hey, we're tricking you into not engaging with the gimmick. If you engage with the gimmick, you can breeze through it. You're paying attention if you're doing what you need to do.
Boss with a gimmick, obviously.
Which Moog?
Real Moog.
I've never fought him with the thing, so I don't know.
You've only fought him as a boss that has a gimmick that you didn't use. You didn't work around the gimmick.
I only fought him as a boss that I didn't identify there was a gimmick to begin with.
Right, because you didn't have it.
Right.
Is that considered a boss with a gimmick or not? Or a boss with a mechanic?
No, yeah, that's a mechanic, not a gimmick.
Just a mechanic.
Yeah, a gimmick is like oh,
Yeah.
the boss has a thing. There's a way to beat this guy. Like for Kings, it's a DPS check. That's not a mechanic. That's a gimmick.
Right.
Moog has a mechanic, and if you don't have the thing, you basically just die. It's not a gimmick.
Except
that's a mechanic.
No, if you literally just died, then it's a gimmick because like no, you need the thing, but because it does a ton of damage, it's just a mechanic.
You just
yeah, because totally. Yeah, I agree with that.
That's a mechanic boss.
So okay.
Mechanic bosses.
So does your 5 out of 5 Souls game, like what percentage of the bosses in your ideal Dream Souls game?
Not a percentage. It's about placement.
Right. So okay, well let me ask you this: what about a Souls game with all gimmick bosses, but they're all placed, but they're all executed well? They're all great.
It doesn't matter how well they're executed if every boss is a gimmick boss. Because now there's no boss that is like, just the fundamentals of the game.
Okay, what if the last boss is the fundamentals of the game, and then every other boss
sounds like it's bad placement? Because
you're probably right.
The bosses should be reinforcing stuff, and it's hard to, you could do that with a gimmick, but each gimmick would have to be an isolated thing. It just wouldn't work as well.
All right, so this was another thing. I'm touching my mic cable. It might sound bad. I forget who I was talking about this with. Oh, it was Travis. So I was talking with Travis, shout out Trav, about the future of video games and how like going to be a point in which like you can play like because of AI, you're going to be able to play Bloodborne. Were you there? Was this at dinner?
I was here. I was part of this conversation.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know that Trav was there. I think
okay,
we just talked about this on Discord.
This was at dinner. Oh, then we might be talking about different things. But basically the idea that like like having AI control games to the point where or all sorts of media, right? Like I can watch Breaking Bad, but I'm like I'm using AI to control it, and I'm like, oh well, like what if Jesse died in season 1? Spoilers, he doesn't.
Shout out spoilers.
Or like, hey, I'm playing Bloodborne, but I'm like, what if Bloodborne like had Sekiro's like, grapple arm and I could run around the rooftops and stuff. Like what would that sort of game look like? And you have like this AI that like can just basically create games on the fly based on your prompts, based on the fact that like, hey, I'm doing stuff that exists. And the more imaginative you get, the weirder it gets. But if you really have like strong reference points, you could start creating these like pretend games, like what we're talking about. Hey, what about a Souls game where every boss has like a gimmick? I mean, obviously this is very loosey-goosey and vague. This AI's got to be really good. But imagine you're just like, you sit down, you put on your fucking crazy headset, your fucking limbs go numb, and then you fucking load into your game, and it's reading your thoughts. And as it's reading your thoughts, you're imagining the game that you would want to exist, and it's just creating it for you on the fly. Every moment is flow state. What if that's happening right now? You're in it.
This ain't it.
That's crazy, in it. Help. Chime in. Help me. Everything's falling apart. Nothing's real. Everything is the same level of real. Imagination is the boundary in which our lives exist. If you're watching this, Jason, this is a message for you. Wake up.
What do you think about the Super Mario Wonder reviews?
Way too high. I'm way too high. No, I'm actually not that. I'm not really that high. I'm chilling, mostly just drinking these Oktoberfest.
The question was Super Mario Wonder.
Really, I'm baffled by 92. Come on, dude. All right, so here's the thing.
Have you seen gameplay? Have you watched?
Yeah. I watched the guy streaming it.
Do you think it looks like a
no
92?
Fuck no. No, dude. I watched the fight with Baby Bowser.
Spoilers!
Jr.
I didn't know Baby
Whatever.
Bowser was in the game.
I don't know what his name is. Bowser, whatever. It might be a different
Bowser.
guy. I don't know. I watched a fight. I watched a boss fight. Okay, I watched a couple things. I watched a level. I watched a different level. I watched a boss fight. I'm not a Mario lore expert. Probably different character. Probably Bowser wife or something.
Bowser Jr.
It might have been Bowser Jr., but I'm not 100% sure. All I know is that I'm watching it and I was like trying to dissect, like, hey, what? Not even trying to like dig too deep, but really just as I'm watching
What makes
it, I'm
this
like,
fun?
what makes it? Not what makes it fun, right? Because fun is Lords of the Fallen, right? You know what I mean? What makes something fun doesn't fucking matter. Like you said, fucking, what's it called is fun. Dark and Darker is fun. Okay. Maybe not all the time.
I didn't say that.
Well, you said it can be fun.
Did I say that? That wasn't today.
No, not today. Shout out like some other podcast episode. But the idea being that all sorts of things can be fun. Drinking beer can be fun, but like, is drinking beer a 5 out of 5? No. Is it a 92 Metacritic score? Probably not. It's got some downsides to it, right? Yeah, there might be some fun involved in this process, but depending on how you approach it, it can be a fucking nightmare. I was hungover for like 3 days until today.
The question was Super Mario Wonder.
And my point is that Super Mario Wonder looks like it can be fun, but what the fuck could possibly elevate it to a 90 plus score across the board?
Like I said, I watched that Digital Foundry review, and I was like, yeah, let me watch this because whatever, it's Digital Foundry.
Of all the games that they could do like a tech analysis on, like what?
Well, it wasn't a tech analysis.
Oh, it was just a review?
It was a review.
Ew.
And so I was like, that's weird.
Shout out Digital Foundry.
They don't do these, and I don't like their opinions most of the time. They're decent for tech analysis. They're not even good, but they're decent. But reviews, it's like, that's not really their thing. And so it was the main guy.
They're like, what? That's our thing.
It was the main guy, and yeah, he went on a thing for like 10 minutes
about the soundtrack,
about how soundtracks are the most about how important soundtracks are to platformers. And it was like, oh, if you don't have a good soundtrack in your platformer is bad. Basically, was the thing.
Shout out Impossible Game, best platformer.
And he went on like a whole thing where he compared like Super Mario World to like new Super Mario Bros. U to Super Mario Wonder, like their soundtracks. And he was like, look,
ridiculous.
Super Mario Worlds is great, limited by the tech, but good melody. And then he goes, new Super Mario U's, that one I don't like. That one sucks. The instrumentation sucks. And then he goes to Super Mario Wonder.
What an objective opinion, dude.
And he goes, I think this one sounds really good. And then he did that for like 4 soundtracks. And I was like, holy shit. 1, I don't care. 2, some of the Super Mario Bros. U ones weren't bad.
2, people have hearing disabilities.
There was one track.
If you really want to start getting into accessibility and what matters in games, I tell you what, as much as I like video game music, including water level songs, not anywhere near what I would include invaluable in game design.
He spent so much time on it that I was blown away, because it's like, music matters in games to an extent.
It does matter. It does matter.
But you could also make a 10 out of 10, a 5 out of 5 platformer that doesn't have
literally
sound.
Soundless. Yes.
Yeah, that's not that you could imagine that's totally feasible. It's not like the soundtrack is completely, like you said, invaluable. It's like, no,
it just doesn't, it's not going to take a 5 out of 5. It's not going to take a 4 out of 5 to a 5 out of 5.
It's not going to take a 3 out of 5 to a 4 out of 5. It has no effect on what you would rate the game.
Could it take a 5 out of 5 to a 4?
If it was like really
bad? And even then, man, it would have to be like
really bad.
I'm hurting.
Yeah, it'd have to be like grading.
Yeah. Not just like, I didn't like the notes that they used there. It could have been. a different tune.
That's basically what the complaint was.
Yeah,
when he was
the
saying about
tune should have been different than it was.
there was one where it was like the
fuck?
new
What are you
Super Mario
talking
Bros.
about?
U, and it was like a remix of like the classic like Mario Bros. Underground, like the da 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 dun. And it sounded fine. It was with a bass guitar doing the do 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 do, and it wasn't anything like exciting. But it was like, hey, that sounded better than the original. It did, and it was fine.
Sure.
And he's like, it just feels kind of hollow, and all they're doing is copying the original Super. And it's like, bruh, that was
look,
fine.
Just like you and I, most people just like to yap. People talking about blah blah blah. No. You right now, you're doing good, but that guy in that moment, just yapping. He's just saying words for his
10
YouTube
minutes on
channel.
the soundtrack in that review. 25-minute
Yapping.
review, 10 minutes on the soundtrack. And it's like, bruh, the game's not the fucking soundtrack. The game is the game stuff.
I would be fine with like having a dedicated video or like a something
The music
like,
of
hey,
Super Mario
talking about
Wonder.
it and really giving your thoughts on it. But if you're reviewing the game, shut the fuck up about the soundtrack for anything more than 30 seconds. Hey, you can say whether or not you like it or if there's a serious technical issue with a soundtrack. But aside from that, I think like when you're reviewing games, I think even music reviews in general, like Anthony Fantano and all sorts of people they try to give really definitive reviews on music and
Sound, just in general.
yeah, but it's anytime you get outside of the bounds of like general production value or like the actual quality of the sound being produced versus like composition, I think you're in a immediately an incredibly subjective territory, to the point at which like if you're reviewing games in an official capacity, specifically games, because hey, if you're reviewing music in an official capacity, you're accepting that pure subjectivity of music. With games, it's like, dude, there are going to be people that are going to feel the complete opposite of what you're thinking about those songs. Like you said, you're like, oh, I think this sounds good. It sounds better than the original. And he's like, oh, I think it sounds hollow. Okay, well, neither one is objectively true. And it's impossible to get close to an objective truth about that. Versus things like game design or audio design, where it's like, hey, there can be real problems that have, having issues with composition and
Well, I think
wanting
that
things
it's
to
just
be
like
more like something else.
music is like, dude, you want to review music? Good fucking luck. That's an incredibly technical field. That's a whole other thing.
And even when you get into the technicalities of music, that's not objectively true of somebody of the way in which music is subjective in general. Because you might be able to say that like, well, technically, like the way that they switched keys here at this point felt really jarring to me, and like
it's like, hey, is that what they were trying to convey? Was that the point of the
exactly.
fucking art form?
At a certain point, it's like, hey, reviewing Van Gogh painting stuff. It's like, dude, your art is such a subjective medium, and music falls, I think, more into that than video games. I think movies are closer to video games in the sense of like, hey, it's easier to critique movies and it's easier to critique games than it is to critique music, because when you're critiquing music,
music's just abstracted from the ideas that it's presenting in a way that makes it hard to evaluate it.
Right.
Whereas something like a movie or a video
spending 10 minutes fucking talking about it, or 5 or however long in your fucking video game
review. It was 10. It wasn't
stupid.
5. I was blown away that I'm like, I can't believe you're spending this long talking about the music. And it's not even that you're just saying the music in this game's good. You're going back to a game that came out 8 years ago and saying this game was dog shit and the music is why.
I mean,
and it's like, what?
On top of the fact that, like, dude, on top of the fact that, like, dude, you're talking about Mario games here that are made almost exclusively for children, and you're sitting here reviewing, like, not the quality of the music, but like your fucking stupid take on like how you think the music is in the game. It's just useless.
I thought so too.
That's the thing. Hey,
I was blown away by it.
You're welcome to have your opinions on whatever soundtrack shit you want in a game.
Yeah, how often have we talked about soundtracks in the games that we've talked about?
Basically zero.
Because it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It
doesn't. And there are games that have fantastic soundtracks that when they hit, I do notice it. You know, even playing Lies of P, I think that game has a mixed soundtrack, but there are certain songs where I'm like, this is awesome. Devil May Cry 5, awesome. Lots of old classic games, Mega Man 2, Sonic 2, I believe is the one that I'm familiar with. Even that Mario song, great song. Somebody, dude,
we're gonna go here and say, dude, Mario's a fucking 5 out of 5. It would be a 4 out of 5 if it didn't have that track in it, but
yeah, stupid, just dumb. That's what a dumb opinion.
Yeah, I couldn't stand the review. I watched the whole thing because I had to see how long the soundtrack commentary would go on and like.
But was there anything in their review that really stood out to you as like, oh wow, that really makes the game seem worthy of such high praise? Because yeah. Oh.
Looks like a fucking 2D platformer.
Yeah, and so I was thinking about this, like, hey, what separates something like Mario Odyssey or Mario 64? Like, let's back way up. Back it up. Mario 64 revolutionized 3D platformers. Really set a new standard. Breath of the Wild revolutionized open world game, And the more recent the game examples you get, the more subjective it gets because you don't really see...
Well, even in like 2D platformers, you've got games that have come out in the past 10 years
Hollow Knight revolutionized Metroidvania.
You've got Hollow Knight, you've got Celeste, you've got Super Meat Boy. Yep. You've got some 2D platformers that are like doing stuff that's really
interesting decisions and that other games clearly are influenced by, and it almost starts to create subgenres. Like, I mean, you even see like that, what's that Hollow Knight looking game? It's called like Blood Crow, Crowsmack, Crowsworn. And it just looks like it just looks like Hollow Knight meets Bloodborne, sort of vibes. But it's clearly just Hollow Knight. There's so much Hollow Knight DNA in it. But yeah, like it's very, very obviously like you have these games that are impacting the way people think about games and what's possible within mediums.
The thing that he mentioned in the Mario Wonder review that is the only thing that makes me wonder, like, is that what elevates the game? Is they're like, the Wonder Seed mechanic is like, when they do those, there are all sorts of these one-off ideas.
Yeah.
That you look at it and you're like, there could be a whole game based around this concept that I haven't seen this idea before. This could be a whole game just in itself.
Yeah.
It's like, is there enough of those then that it's like...
And from what I've seen, I think the answer is no. I think it sounds like it's a... I don't know if it's like a mechanic or a gimmick or which one makes it sound worse, but it's a neat idea rather than like, wow, what a game.
Yeah, there was one part where he's like, there was even like a quiz show at one point, and I'm like, isn't that like a staple in Mario games that there's always like a...
Like a little thing?
Yeah.
Like a little mini game?
Like a little quiz show specifically. That's in like Paper Mario. There's a quiz show.
At least in Paper Mario.
I'm pretty sure that's in like a lot of Mario games. That's not like a particularly whoa. Yeah. That came out, and I'm sure there's one in Odyssey. There's no way there's not. And it's like, that's a common trope in these games. That's not like a thing that's like, that was surprising.
And I think that, like even Mario Odyssey, that game has insanely high review scores as well. And I think that's what leads me to believe that there's no way that Mario Wonder is actually the quality that people think that it is, because I think people just really like Mario. you know. And to the point where, you know, like, hey, I really like Mega Man. Like Mega Man 11, it's just okay. I'm not like, holy shit, Mega Man 11 is fucking, it's like, what if Mega Man existed today? And
It's the
you know,
best Mega Man game.
and it's like, no, it's fine. Like, it's cool, and I'm sure that Mario Wonder is equally great. Like, I'm sure it's a great game. And even then, I think great is probably pushing it. It's probably good. I can't imagine. I was talking with a different buddy about this. Like, hey, what do you think? What would you rate Super Mario World? 1 to 5. I'm asking you now. What would you rate Super Mario World today? Playing it today, not. What is its impact?
2 or 3.
Right, like fine. Like 2 might be a little low to me. I would go pretty solid. 3. I don't think it's got any serious issues, but it's nothing.
Yeah, but to me, a 3 isn't like you're in the actively good space.
And I would say it's good, but it does.
Yeah,
it's
I
very
don't know
basic.
that it is. Yeah,
And I don't think that Super Mario Wonder is much different. Yes, it is different, but it's definitely not much.
What do you think is the most overrated game that's come out this year?
Oh shit. You have any that come to mind while I think?
I mean, Super Mario Wonder's got to be up, but it's hard to say that because
Got to be up there.
I haven't played it.
Okay, well, let's talk about the obvious ones. Starfield, there's Super Mario Wonder, Spider-Man 2.
Are the reviews for that out? What are the reviews for
Oh, yeah.
that?
High 90s, same as Mario Wonder, like really high. Let me double check. Yeah, they just came out. Spider-Man 2 reviews. Let's check Metacritic first, because that's the first one that came up. Yep, 91 Metascore, insane high. Let's see if OpenCritic comes up, or if I have to. Oh, here it is. OpenCritic. We've got 91. Yeah, incredibly high. A 91 is an astonishing score.
What are our 90s games this year? It's
here. Let's check
Baldur's
on
Gate
OpenCritic.
and Tears of the Kingdom are like 96.
Let's do okay, so the highest rated of 2023 are Baldur's Gate 3 at 96, Tears of the Kingdom at 96.
Mario
Prime Remastered at 94. That might be the most
Prime Remastered 94.
Dude, I love Metroid. I played that this year. I played the original, when it came out on GameCube. That might have been my introduction to the Metroid series, was Metroid Prime on the GameCube. But 94, I mean, come on, man.
That score has me so confused as far as like, I get it. It's a decent HD remake.
It's a nice it's not even a remake. It's
a
remastered.
It's a nice HD release of
a fucking port.
A classic game.
And it's not, and that game isn't even that classic. So here, let me look
What?
Like, it's great. It's
great.
A
classic game.
Bro,
That's a
compare
classic.
that to Super Mario World or like Mega Man, and it's like
Metroid Prime's a classic. You're tripping.
Hold on. Metroid Prime.
That's a classic game.
Reviews. I want the original. The original, IGN gave it a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Hold on. Not remastered. Here we go. Metacritic.
You're looking for Metacritic scores. These are all going to be from.
I know, it's so high.
Yeah.
No. This is the Metacritic from Metroid Prime, original GameCube, 2002. 97.
Yep.
It's not that good. Metroid Prime is more like an 80.
That's a classic.
It is a classic. I agree. It's a classic. It's just.
It's odd to me that the remaster.
Like Super Metroid's more of a classic than Metroid Prime. Super Metroid spawned a genre. Metroid Prime is a game in a genre. Super Metroid is more of a classic.
What genre is Metroid Prime in?
Super Metroids.
That's not a genre.
It's a third person Metroidvania, and it's a light Metroidvania.
So yeah, there are significant number of people that would say Metroid Prime is not a Metroidvania.
Yeah,
That's a very
exactly.
common take.
Yeah, and to the point where all you can do is call it a 3D Metroidvania. You can't call it a Prime like or like a Prime game. That doesn't exist. That is not a genre that people have been like, holy shit, I need all these games. Souls likes aren't Prime likes. Like it's not.
The reviews for Metroid
not
Prime remaster are confusing just because, like, yeah, I mean, it's the original game. It's the kind of remaster that gets made that you often see panned, where it's like
a lot of times those don't get reviewed well because people have those. System Shock came out this year or last year as well. The System Shock remaster or remake.
That's a reboot.
No, System Shock is a remake.
No, that was a reboot.
No.
For sure that's a reboot.
No. It's the same. It's the OG game.
I don't think it is.
To the point where fans of the original are like, this is perfect. I love it. It's System Shock, but updated. And people that are approaching it from like today's standards are like, it's okay. It's got major design flaws that like don't hold up well today. But I would say the same thing about Metroid
that's
Prime.
the weird thing is that there's no criticisms of the Metroid
Prime's massive dated design flaws. There's all sorts of problems in that game. The way that backtracking is handled in that game and the way that it has you bounce around the map is really uncomfortable, boring, and tedious. To the point where that alone, remastered or not, lowers the game to a 4 out of 5, 80% category.
I think 94 is insane for it.
94 is insane, and I think even for the original, yes, when it came out, oh my god, I can't even games. Bro, like the fucking horse and buggy is so sick. But like Metroid Prime as it is, it's a fine game. You're
comparing Metroid Prime to now Tears of the Kingdom and whatever's right below it. And it's like, is it a...
No, because I think even just the way that it handles backtracking is worse than even Super Metroid. And Super Metroid...
I'm talking about like today, that score, that's what it's comparing it to.
You're talking about this 94.
Yeah, that's what it's comparing. Essentially what just Metroid Prime is.
Which is just wrong.
Right, because Metroid Prime... I mean, that's a great game. It's classic. It's aged fairly well.
It's okay. It's got serious control problems to the point where the controls in remastered are different than the original controls.
It's aged fairly well, but it's not like it's aged like to the point where it's like, oh yeah, if Metroid Prime came out today,
they didn't need to remake it. All they had to do was remaster it. So that's a good point.
Yeah,
but they did change the control scheme because the original controls didn't age well. Meanwhile,
that's probably the most overrated game. Let's keep going. What's next on the list?
Videoverse at a 92. Don't even know.
I haven't played it. Some indie crap. We'll skip all the indies.
Yeah. Okay. RE4 remake 92. I feel strongly that one is up there.
I think that's like a very slight overrated.
Might be slightly overrated,
but to the point that it's like, dude, that's very slight.
Sure. Yeah.
It's in that space.
Immediately under that, Super Mario Bros. Wonder at 92.
Possibly overrated. Haven't played it. Don't know.
I think it's probably overrated. We'll skip the indies.
Metroid Prime seems more overrated than Wondered.
Yes, for sure. Street Fighter 6 at a 92.
Also
might be a little overrated, but not like,
that's an overrate.
It's overrated, but people love the shit out of that.
Overrate.
Marvel Spider-Man 2 at 91. Okay, immediately I'm like, okay, is Street Fighter 6 better than Marvel Spider-Man 2? I would say yes, having only played Street Fighter 6 and not very much of it. I think Street Fighter 6 is a much more like, I don't know, that's hard to quantify. That's very subjective.
I think the new Spider-Man is more of an overrate than Resident Evil 4 remake.
Yeah, I agree.
Like I would say that the new Spider-Man, if that was like an average 85, that's where I would say like,
okay, so
that's probably where it should land.
Let's do this. I'm gonna grab the 10 that aren't like clearly indies, whatever, and we're gonna see if we even agree with the order. So we got Baldur's Gate 3, Tears of the Kingdom.
Nope, disagree with the order.
No. We'll fuck with the order after. I'm gonna list them, and then we're gonna go through and pick where we would rate them. So, Baldur's Gate 3, Tears of the Kingdom, Prime Remastered, Resident Evil 4, Mario Wonder, Street Fighter 6, Spider-Man 2,
6th,
Blade 3,
the DLC, right?
Future Redeem. Oh, that's what that is.
Yeah,
okay,
DLC.
Well then we'll skip that because that's just DLC. I'm guessing I shouldn't include Dave the Diver and Sea of Stars.
Those are indie.
Hi-Fi Rush technically is an indie.
Not indie.
Okay, so Hi-Fi Rush at an 89. Dead Space remake at an 89.
That's 10.
Oh, it is?
That was
Can't
10.
count. 1, 2, 3,
Street Fighter
4,
6 was
5,
6.
6, 7. Oh, I'm not including Xenoblade because that's the DLC.
Yeah.
Hi-Fi Rush, Dead Space. That's
Yeah.
9. We're at
Oh.
7. That's 9. One more. Diablo 4. Starfield isn't even in there. Okay.
Starfield, Final Fantasy, Armored Core. None of those made the cut. I love that.
Armored Core is probably the most
all
underrated
appropriate.
game because I think that
No one beat it.
yeah, I think people just bounced off of it.
It's all appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, order.
You could even just do the top 5 if you want, because once you get into bottom 5, who cares? But use those 10 to determine your top 5, and then if you want to keep going
So
past
Tears of
that.
the Kingdom and Baldur's Gate should be switched. Those
Yeah.
are flip-flopped.
Okay, and I do think that they are just in the order that they're in because of alphabetical. Like they're both 96, and Baldur's Gate comes first.
Oh, that's not how I would imagine that.
I'm
assuming there's fractionals and that Baldur's Gate is actually slightly above when you calculate a fraction.
96 and 99 recommend. 96 and 97 recommend. So maybe that's it. Yeah. Okay. Even if that's the aspect, it's that hey, like the other score is taken into account. Okay.
Those should be flipped. Baldur's Gate's not finished. Notoriously incomplete.
Oh, like it really? Did you ever beat it?
No, Act 3 is a fucking shit show.
Oh, okay.
When I got to Act 2 was a shit show. Act 2 seems fairly decent now, but Act 3 is still not done. That game's not finished. What was there in terms of like Act 1 is terrific.
Oh, okay.
But you get to Act 3 and all sorts of bugs start cropping up that like ruin plot lines and fuck shit up.
Gross.
It's just a complete mess.
Okay, so you would say Tears of the Kingdom, #1 game of the year?
Yeah, Tears of the Kingdom's game of the year.
I really want to agree with that. Because I do think that game succeeds in some really major areas, but it also just falls really flat in a lot of areas and is the reason why I have put it down and not picked it back up. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's fun, it's neat, but is it that engaging?
Yeah, for 100+ hours it was. So
It wasn't for me for that long. It took some really active, like, I want to keep pushing. It felt like trudging at points, you know?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, I didn't have that experience.
Okay, look, here's the thing. I'm going to piss myself. So, can you do me a favor? I'm going to be really fast. This is the first time we've ever had to do something like this. You want to sing a song? All right, I'm going to piss.
Not doing that. Why didn't you just put on the be right back screen? It's Tears of the Kingdom. It's Baldur's Gate. And then after that, it doesn't matter because the next 2 highest games are remakes and remasters. And as we all know, those can never win Game of the Year. That if RE2 Remake didn't win, then no remake or remaster can. We know that. No remake or remaster will ever win Game of the Year. It's like a thing. Games journalists don't like voting for remakes or remasters. So they really are in consideration. While they may be overrated or underrated or where they rank, just doesn't matter because they'll never be considered. You've got those top 2 that are obviously in consideration. After that, it's probably fucking Spider-Man. It's Tears of the Kingdom, Baldur's Gate, Spider-Man, Mario, RE4 Remake. That's the 5 in order. Any other order is objectively wrong, just based on what we know. What's your order?
I would say okay, first of all, let me acknowledge I have not played Baldur's Gate 3. and I like it more than Tears of the Kingdom, despite that. Yeah, I played Tears of the Kingdom for probably like 80 fucking hours. Like, I have played that game a good amount, enough to be like, I think 96 is too high. So that's my main thing. 96, I think, is too high for Tears of the Kingdom. I think it's closer to an 89. You're gonna get there. I think it's a 4 out of 5. Great game. Great game. I think Tears of the Kingdom is a great game, but I think it has aspects that hold it back from being a 5 out of 5. Like, I genuinely do. That
Like what?
that might be that might be true for Baldur's Gate as well, so it's hard for me to say. But I would say that the game has technical issues. I think it runs like shit. It has problems with the design regarding your companion characters that follow you around.
That's a spoiler. I did know they were companion characters.
Yeah, you did.
Because you spoiled it.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
Not right now.
Yeah, but you did spoil it. That's a spoiler.
And they're not really companion characters, so this is actually even more of a spoiler for Tears of the Kingdom.
Stop spoiling.
Is that you have these powers. You have powers, and they're fucking annoying. The way that they're designed, they are in your way. While you're trying to play the game, they're in your way. There's no way to turn them off, make them go away. Like,
just don't have them. That's what I do.
Yeah, or play the whole game without them. Until whenever you get them, then you'll immediately realize, oh my god, this is fucking annoying.
Well, I do need them. There's stuff
you do
that
need
I
them.
found that I'm like, I can't do.
You actually can, I'm pretty sure, beat the game without them.
Sure, you can beat the game, but there's stuff I found that I can't do.
Yeah, there's
without
definitely
them.
stuff that requires them. I also think that the Skylands, the Sky Islands, the Skylands, the Sky Islands, the Skylands the Sky Islands are really
The
not
Skylands.
that. They're really disappointing. The beginning of the game, it feels really strong, but even that, it's just a zone. Like, it's not like, oh, it has any impact to the fact that it's above the world or not, because at the beginning, if you fall, you die. Damage or whatever. Like, there's, you can't transition. So it's really disappointing. There's it was the main thing that was marketed, but even if it wasn't, they're just boring. Like, the sky stuff is very copy paste. It's like, oh, you have the orb things that you can go into. You have the vertical dive things you can do.
What orb thing?
There's like these orb things that you can, like, they're like big circles and they'll have a hole, and inside of them there will be a shrine. Yeah, so it's just a bunch of copy pasted stuff, and each thing is fine. None of them are. That's the thing. None of it's horrible. But what's elevating it to a 5? Is it the underground, which, in my opinion, huge spoilers. There's an underground in Tears of the Kingdom. If you didn't know, I had that spoiled, and I was annoyed. It's underwhelming. All of it's very underwhelming. Half-baked.
Underwhelming. I like the underground a lot.
These nuts. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I
don't
think
know what I guess
5.
I'm really confused as to how you can say it's underwhelming, because, like, I found the underground and I wasn't like,
the activities.
This is underwhelming.
No,
I was like, what's down?
There is an overwhelming sense of, like, oh my god, this is huge and there's so much to do here, but it is very samey, very bland, and very uninteresting gameplay in the underground, in my opinion. And by very uninteresting, I mean it's okay. Like, it's not bad. I would say that it's, yeah, like 3 out of 5. Like, if the whole game was just the underground, no.
There's a lot to do down there.
There's a lot.
I don't know that I agree with you.
There's a lot to do, but there's not a big variety. You come across the fucking the ancient you'll talk to the little NPC statue men guy things, and you can buy the
pose.
No, not the pose, but you can do that. But I'm talking, those are statue men. I'm talking about the automaton guys. You find, like, the abandoned factory things underground.
Oh, yeah.
You find those.
There's arenas.
There's arenas. There's some boss fights.
Bunch of boss fights. There's a bunch of unique bosses down there.
All of the bosses are reused bosses.
Are they?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Even like the Hydra thing.
The Hydra.
Yeah, like the 3-headed dragon.
The ones that are all over the game.
No, it's the the lightning, fire, and ice dragon.
Oh, I haven't fought that. Spoilers. There's a 3-headed lightning fire, whatever. No, but there are like, dude, they reuse it. They reuse the fucking one of the major bosses from the story. Like it's like, hey, the end of the Goron quest is a boss, you know, and then like, oh yeah, you can just fight that boss like here and there in the underground, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for all the bosses, which then diminishes those bosses when you come across them in the story, and it makes them less interesting when you find them in the underground. Either way, there's all sorts of stuff where like, hey, it's not that it's bad, it's not that it's not fun, it's just that like it's overrated in my opinion. Yeah, 4 out of 5. Yeah, it's good. 4 out of 5 is nothing to scoff at. Great game. Most games are not.
I think 4 out of 5 is an underrate.
And I can understand that, and I would
do
say
think
most people would agree with you.
96 average seems too high.
96 average is too high because 96 should be the peak at which you could rate that game.
But
because it's got problems that it's not 100.
like if an individual said that's a 10 out of 10, I'm like, that's not really an overrate if you're not doing like half scales. 9.5, sure.
Also, a
9.0,
10 out of
sure.
10 is fine if you're gonna or a 5 out of 5 is fine if you're gonna rate your limited experience with the game. But again, yeah, when you start talking about averages, you know, I'm again like, hey, the first fucking 40 to 60 hours of Elden Ring is a 10 out of 10. And then you start encountering the problems of scale. Start encountering the fact that like, they're reusing bosses in ways that's really uninteresting and not fun. And oh, I'm really tired of fighting these enemies. And oh, like when I went here, I was really able to predict exactly what I was gonna be fucking walking into in a way that's not fun. Elden Ring and Tears of the Kingdom suffer from a lot of those same problems, you know?
Yeah, I think that it would make sense to rate them similarly.
Yeah, and I would say they're both 4 out of 5. Like, I mean, as much as I like to say...
That's crazy. I think that's just totally wrong. I think they're both 5 out of 5s.
The thing is, I think Elden Ring has more moments of, like, holy shit, this is fucking awesome. But that's very subjective. You know, and that's the type of stuff that's going to elevate it to a 5 out of 5.
That's bonkers.
For I think a lot of people.
I think that's as dumb as saying how important the soundtrack is. That it's like, oh no, those moments of whoa.
Well, that's exactly what we've talked about, you know, in 2 episodes prior to this, is the idea that there needs to be those things that elevate you from a 4 to a 5. And I think that a lot of those things tend to be very, you know, how you feel about the ladder scene in MGS3 is going to potentially make you think, oh yeah, like I really like that game, but that fucking ladder part was obnoxious. 4 out of 5, right? Versus holy shit, like it just felt like this moment that I really loved. It's a very subjective thing.
It's not a moment though; it's a scene.
Taking the elevator,
it's not like a moment.
Taking the elevator in Elden Ring down to the fucking underground.
Yeah, I would say it's also not a moment. It's like a very specific staging of a scene.
And those are the things that I think for a lot of people like transition a game, because they create, they in themselves aren't moments, they are scenes, they are things just happening, but they create these you know, permanent memories. I mean, it's no different than the interconnectivity of Dark Souls 1.
No, yeah, so I disagree.
And being like, oh my god.
Similar to that, but what it's dissimilar to in Elden Ring is the part that's way better than the elevator in Elden Ring, which is my experience in
the underground and
at the capital. Where it's like I'm running around the capital, I get fucking lost running around the capital, I fall down the fucking well. Now I really don't know where the fuck I am because I'm in the sewers. I start fucking running around down there. Incredibly
subjective. A lot of people hate that aspect.
And then I fall down even more, and then I'm lost even more, and then I go on a run, and then I'm in that fucking That's not a moment.
That is your particular subjective experience with the game.
No, a moment is one of those.
It was very clearly designed to be experienced the way you experienced it.
No, I don't think it was. I think it was designed in a way to accommodate that as I think it was designed as a way to potentially accommodate that experience, but it wasn't designed to experience it that way. No, you weren't designed. And that's it wasn't designed in the way. It wasn't designed in the way that the elevators are designed. That it's you get on the fucking elevator.
Yeah,
and you go
it's much more like, hey, we are hoping that this is an experience that you can have when you do this, but you might not.
Right. And so that to me the organic experience is much more important than
Agreed.
the staged
And I would agree that was a 5 out of
of
5 moment in Elden Ring, but that's very subjective.
that to
That-
me stands out far more than their staged moments
Agreed.
of,
I
oh
would
yeah,
agree.
you went down the elevator, you did
I
whatever.
should have called that one out first. That's a better example.
Also, that happens in the capital, and I had already cleared the first 40 to
60% of
60
the game,
hours
yeah.
of Limgrave. I've done Caelid. I've done Liurnia.
You're doing
Elden
the
Ring
capital,
holds
yeah.
up for a very long
Very long
time.
I think Tears of the Kingdom holds up a lot less long. I think I got more bored quicker in Tears of the Kingdom. We could talk about Tears of the Kingdom for a long time. I just think that that's I think that game's overrated. It does appear that Mario Wonder is more overrated than Tears of the Kingdom. Those games are separated by 4 points of score. They're nearly identical scores in the eyes of most people. Because if you're going to start rounding, it's like, oh, those are both 9 out of 10 games, you know. Or maybe even 10 out of 10. Like, what the fuck? Mario Wonder and Tears of the Kingdom being on the same bracket, is baffling to me. But Metroid Prime Remastered is probably the most overrated game of the year. It has to be. Right. It's a fucking remaster.
It for sure is.
It has to.
I'm sure it's a good remaster. Faithful.
I played it. I 100% that game. It's good.
It's faithful. It's a great adaptation, but
barely an adaptation, dude.
it's a 9.5 out of 10.
Insane.
Metroid Prime with some HD graphics and a different control scheme.
It's a 3 out of 5. Metroid Prime Remastered. Metroid Prime in general is a 3 out of 5.
Yeah, it's good.
Good game. Slightly better than Lords of the Fallen because I'm not questioning if it's maybe a 2. You know, I'm questioning maybe it's a 4, but it feels a little.
You start getting to like that seems kind of high.
Yeah. Versus Lords of the Fallen, no way it's a 4. Zero chance. It's very possibly a 2, but it falls in. Hey, they both fall into a 3. They're fine. They're fun. You can have fun with them, and if you don't enjoy them, I can probably understand why. You know what I mean? Whereas, hey, if you don't enjoy Tears of the Kingdom, it's
like, why do you play video games?
Yeah, what do you? Yeah, and so the things when I complain about it again, like I'm like, dude, Tears of the Kingdom at a minimum is a 4. When I say any negative aspects of that game, you are having to those are counter to the incredible feats that game pulls off, right? But I mean, I could go on all sorts of stuff that's really just boring about that game. Every aspect of the main quest, except for Zelda, which I won't spoil, but every other aspect is just like okay, it's just stuff. It's fluff, and it's the main quest.
I mean, it's definitely a step up from
Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild is bad.
Is worse. That's more like a maybe even a 2. Like if you were just gonna critique like the main quest of Breath of the Wild, like let's say you stripped it down and it's like, hey, you have 4 dungeons you have to go do essentially, and like the little quest along with it, and there's no open world. That game's a 2 out of 5. It's dog shit. Tears of the Kingdom, I think it's fine. Like I had some fun with the main quest. There's a little bit more fun with the unique mechanics, you know, and in the way that like, hey, in the sky one you have the ability to blast yourself with the wind, and in the water one you blah 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 and yada yada. No, that's why I said blah 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 and yada yada. Everyone knows the sky one.
No, I didn't.
You watched Trav play, dude. Stop lying. You're fucking sitting here acting like you
did not play Tears of the Kingdom.
We watched him play, and you watched him do the fucking Rito quest.
No, I didn't.
I wonder if the noise gate cut that out. But all right, spoilers aside, those aspects of the game are both really subpar. And for you to be like, hey, the game's a 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, it's like that shit sucks, and my fart stinks. I blame the silence on you. You're supposed to, anytime that there's dead air after I'm done talking, you're supposed to chime in. You're holding your breath, aren't you? Want to be done?
Yeah, let's call it.
Here's the Kingdom most overrated game of the year. Right above Metroid Prime Remastered. You heard it here, folks. You heard it here,
That's
folks.
wrong.
You heard it here.
Metroid Prime,
Metroid Grime, more like.
Resident Evil 4,
Fears of my Bing Bong.
Super Mario Wonder.